I'm going to talk about free speech today, and this actually does follow up on the earlier session I was involved in on truth. That is, what is the nature of truth? How do we know what's true? The problem is we can't know for sure, and no one is smart enough to figure it out on their own. So we need to communicate with other people, thus free speech. That is to say, if we think of science as this empirical search for truth in which we use experimentation and empiricism and logic and reason and rationality to derive conclusions about the natural world that we assume is really out there. The problem is I can't operate on my own in isolation to do that because I'm not smart enough, and neither are you, neither is anybody else. So we need other people. All we have are our thoughts, so we have to communicate those thoughts with others. And the reason to do that is because there's a good chance we could be wrong in our hypothesizing and theorizing and guessing and just thinking about the world. So we have to talk to other people and not just talk to them, but listen to them carefully to make sure we haven't gone off the rails. That is to say, I'm going to be arguing in this opening session here that this idea of open debate, disputation, conversation, and that kind of free-wheeling dialoguing with other people uncritically. That is to say, no cancel culture here. We just want to talk to other people, and they should be free to say what they want, and we should be free to listen, because that is the key to how science works. And in that sense, before I dive into the arguments for free speech, that here I'm making a case for kind of the social nature of science. That is, whatever the scientific method is, and it depends on who you're talking to about exactly how it's enumerated, observation and deduction and induction and deduction and prediction and testing and so forth. There's a social element to it. That is to say, we hope in the fullness of time to find some kind of consensus amongst the experts in a particular field about what it is we think is true with a small t, provisionally true. That is to say, there's enough evidence for it that it would be reasonable to offer our provisional assent with the proviso that we can change our mind if the evidence changes. Well, the only way to reach consensus is to talk to other people. So scientific communities have to have a certain kind of openness and freedom to speak their minds, and that's the basis of peer review, for example, or open peer commentary, where the, say, article is submitted to some blind reviewers. That is to say, they don't know who you are, you don't know who they are, so that people are free to speak their mind and not worry about offending somebody. Because the moment you start worrying about that sort of thing, you self-censor. You don't say what you're really thinking. And that's very dangerous for science in particular and for just trying to understand truth in general. Because you might have gone off the rails. And if somebody is afraid to tell you because maybe you have too much power, you're in a position at a university or in a lab in which they're afraid to tell you that they think you're wrong, then that's very dangerous. So that's kind of the basis of it. If you think of consensus science not as a form of authoritarianism or democracy, because that's not what I mean. I mean that the people that are best qualified to understand a particular phenomenon under study, say climate science, and they're competitive with each other, and they have kind of an open marketplace where they can debate the merits of the different theories, say CO2 gases in the atmosphere and whether or not that causes warming to increase. At some point over the course of years or decades, consensus is reached that most of us think X is the case. In this case, with anthropogenic global warming, we think it's largely human-caused and real. And so you often see this figure like 97% of climate scientists think AGW is true. These are the most qualified people who compete with each other and try to debunk each other in the pages of scientific journals. And what emerges is this kind of general consensus. Of course, it's never going to be 100%. That's fine. Progress is made in science. Again, through that open debate, disputation, free exchange, marketplace of ideas, as it were. And of course, that's the basis of a liberal democracy. We all have to be able to be free to say what we were thinking. And then we come down to running the experiment, as it were, in this case, having an election. So my latest book is on this subject, Giving the Devil His Due. The devil is whoever disagrees with you. And what the devil is due is their voice, their thoughts. They should be free to think and say whatever they want. Because, well, I'm going to enumerate those in 10 different reasons. So here's the kind of my articulation of why we should give the devil his due, with that background on how science works. But I would apply that to anything. So that is to say, the moment you decide, I don't think everybody should be free to say whatever they want. I think we should have some censorship. Okay. Well, who decides which speech and thought is acceptable and which is unacceptable? You, me, the majority, the thought committee, the language police. The control of speech is how dictatorships and autocracies rule. We must resist the urge to control what other people think and say. Second reason, what criteria are you going to use to censor somebody's speech? Are these ideas that I disagree with, ideas that you disagree with? Are they thoughts that differ from the mainstream thoughts of the community? Is it whatever the majority says is true? That's the speech we're going to respect, and then anyone who dissents from that, we're going to censor. The problem with that is what's called the tyranny of the majority, which is why we do not have, at least in the United States, a direct democracy. The problem with a direct democracy is the tyranny of the majority. You just need 51% to say, well, we think slavery is a good thing, so let's bring it back. No, we're not going to do that. And there's reasons we're not going to do that. And it doesn't matter how many people think. So we have a representative democracy, a republic, actually. Anyway, 3, it's not just the right of the speakers to speak, of course, but it is. But more than that, it's the right of listeners to listen. So when college students deplatform speakers that have been invited to come to a campus to give their point of view, some new theory or topic or book or whatever, and the students protest and the speech is canceled, or perhaps even worse, the speaker actually goes there, flies there, and has to stay in a hotel and so forth, and then shows up to give their talk, and then the mob silences them through noisemakers and shouting and chanting and so forth. Well, it's not just violating the rights of the speaker to speak, but the audience to hear. Maybe a lot of students came there to hear what this person has to say. Now, most college campuses are pretty liberal, and some college campuses bring in conservatives just so the students can see what conservatives think, what half the country thinks. Maybe it's good that they should know what half the country's thinking. And so by silencing the speaker, then you're robbing your fellow students of their right to hear what that other perspective is. Just because you're offended, so what? Too bad. Okay. Number 4, and here, the next couple of points, I'm kind of echoing John Stuart Mill's arguments from his classic 1859 work on liberty. We might be completely right, but still learn something new in hearing what someone else has to say. Or 5, we might be partially right and partially wrong. And by listening to other viewpoints, we might stand corrected and refine and improve our beliefs. Or 6, we might be completely wrong. So hearing criticism or counterpoint gives us the opportunity to change our minds and improve our thinking. No one is infallible. The only way to find out if you've gone off the rails is to get feedback on your beliefs, opinions, and even your facts. Number 7, whether you're right or wrong, by listening to the opinions of others, we have the opportunity to develop stronger arguments and build better facts in our positions. If you know only your own position, you do not know it as well as you would if you knew your opponent's position. Here, this is John Stuart Mill's famous line from On Liberty: "He who knows only his own side doesn't even know that." And so here I use an example of the abortion issue. So, most of my students at Chapman University, where I teach, are liberal. So they're pro-choice on the abortion issue. And, I like to ask them, What are the best arguments that the pro-lifers have?
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.